So this is a new idea, this is a collection of like my oldest videos that were like part ones, part twos, part threes. So no, I haven't just re-uploading things, I'm just making it better. I guarantee it. Please watch it anyway, it's a collection of the entire story. You don't have to click through all those different episodes when you rewatch my stuff, because obviously you'd rewatch my stuff. Yeah. See ya. Bye. Let the video commence. A small Greek force stands in a small valley pass, facing a much larger Persian force of 200,000. This day will go down in history. It is the Battle of Thermopylae. Thermopylae, a tale of an epic battle, a last stand of valiant people against a ruthless dictator. Who wouldn't love it? It's an awesome example of Greek prowess and power. But it wasn't that simple. To understand the battle and the lasting impacts of Thermopylae, we need to look at the world at the time. The Persian Empire was one of the biggest empires the world had ever seen, and on its path to expansion it was preparing to conquer Greece. The Persian Emperor Xerxes gave the Greek city-states two options: capitulation or destruction. Now, Greece wasn't a country yet, it wasn't unified. It was made up of about 700 city-states, like Sparta and Athens, which makes the map look less like this and more like this. 30 of these Greek city-states decided to form the Greek coalition to stop the Persian invaders. Well, there was around 700 Greek city-states at the time, so why did only 30 of them agree to join? Well, it was actually because most of them were at war with each other and refused to help. Athens and Sparta were enemies of many city-states, and since they were the main forces of this coalition, most states thought it was a grab for power, which it might have been, and decided not to go. Most either capitulated to Persia or remained neutral through the battle. Now let's look at the Persians. I know everyone likes the Greeks as the underdog, but the Persians were in fact quite a good empire. They believed in freedom of religion, and they did not believe in slavery. They did not force their cultures on people they conquered, and, well, conquer isn't actually the right word to use. They acted more like liberators, if anything, allowing people to return to their homeland if it was in the empire. But sadly, one thing they would not tolerate was insubordination, and the punishment was very severe. That was what had started this whole conflict, as Darius, the old Persian emperor, had gone to war with Greece over a rebellion. The Athenians had backed it, and he had promised to raze Athens to the ground. But a small Athenian force had stopped him on the plains of Marathon, which is another story that's quite interesting, which I should talk about someday. But anyway, Emperor Xerxes was hell-bent on revenge. Now, the Greeks realized the Persians were way more powerful. For each Greek there was at least 15 Persians, and that was the coalition at full power, much less the elites Leonidas was going to make his stand with. But I hear you say, Red, the Battle of Thermopylae was fought by 300 Spartans. Everyone knows that. Well, you're wrong. Don't let that movie fool you. On the actual day, there were 7,000 Greek troops from 30 of the Greek city-states, ranging from Parthians to Phoenicians, and of course the 300 Spartans. So Leonidas and Themistocles had to decide on a place to stand, a choke point that would give the Spartan Phalanx a greater advantage. Their final decision? A small mountain pass called Thermopylae. With sheer cliffs on one side and mountains to the other, this was the perfect place for the Greeks to stand. So with 7,000 Greeks, Leonidas set off for Thermopylae, the only hope for the Greek coalition. Now let's talk about the Spartan Phalanx. This was one of the most feared techniques in all of the ancient world. The Spartans would line up in rows, placing their shields together, with their spears sticking through the gaps between the shields, creating a bristling wall of bronze and iron, truly an unmovable object. As they reached Thermopylae, they set up in the small pass, and as the Persian army, nearly 200,000 strong, marched on Thermopylae, they scoffed at the small Greek force. Xerxes placed a siege on a nearby hill so he could watch his triumph. He first ordered his archers to pepper the coalition's forces, but the arrows glanced off the phalanx's shield. Then he sent the bulk of his army, known as Medes, versatile, quick warriors trained for Persian battle efficiency. But this was not Persia. These troops were light infantry and barely scratched the shields of these elite Spartans. Even though there were many more Medes than Spartans, the Spartans stayed strong. At one point, the Spartans retreated, and the Medes broke formation to give chase, but the Spartans cycle-charged and decimated the Medes. Xerxes was enraged by the fact that they had not broken through yet, so he sent his elite royal guard, known as the Immortals, to break the line. But the Immortals were only immortal in name, and up against the Spartan Phalanx they stood no chance. Soon they were also dead. As another day came to an end, it seemed the Greeks really could win this battle, despite the Persians' great number. The Greeks had held out surprisingly well. But there was one fatal flaw, a small pass that cut through the Spartan line. Now, Leonidas had thought of this, and had sent 1,000 Phaeacians to guard this pass. But sadly, after 2 days without any sight of the battle, the Phaeacians had split into little camps. But what was there to worry about? It's only the biggest weakness in your battle line. But the Phaeacians weren't thinking. It's highly unlikely that the Persians would have even known about this pass, much less go through the effort of going through it. But of course, that's what the Persians did. And imagine the surprise of the Phaeacians when Immortals spilled out of the pass. So as the battle raged, Leonidas looked back and noticed the retreating Phaeacians, and he knew he had been flanked. He knew the battle was lost and sent the army back with a reserve force, leaving him and 300 Spartans. Oh, so that's where the legend comes from. Anyway, he decided to make a last stand, but then 700 soldiers decided to stay with. Still wrong. So, these 700 Greeks lost all fear, knowing death is certain, and they fight. They fight for their life and for Greece's life. Leonidas goes down early in the battle, and the Greeks get a second wind to recover his body so it cannot be mutilated by the enemy. And they hold out. These Greeks, who were probably enemies a week ago, die side by side for something more than just their city. It was for the Hellenic culture, which wasn't in danger anyway, but that's not important right now. So, after days of fighting, the Persians slew the last Greeks with a hail of arrows, and the Persians tore through Greece so Xerxes could burn Athens to the ground. But when they arrived, Athens was empty, not a single soul in sight. They were gone, but they will be back. When Leonidas and his reserves had his last stand, around 6,000 of the Greeks managed to retreat. These soldiers told of the brave sacrifice of Leonidas, making them into martyrs, and this helped the coalition gain allies. We must look at the other side of the coalition. Remember that when Xerxes reached Athens, it was empty. There was no one, or next to no one, left in the city, and the reason for that is the much less talked about hero of the war, Themistocles. This man is a true legend. While Leonidas was the brawn, this man was certainly the brain. He was the leader of Athens, and to tell his story, we must begin 3 years before the war even starts. Themistocles was a prominent politician in the Athenian government. He was very smart, and when Athens discovered a silver deposit close to the city, he was the one who convinced the public that it would be better to invest in a brand new fleet. This was possibly the best decision of his entire life. Not only did it help Athens become the most powerful Greek city-state, it saved Athens on multiple occasions. Most of Greece was focused on land warfare, and thus their armies were mostly land troops. So when Persia attacked, there was no way the coalition's small navy could stand against the 12,000 ships the Persians were going to use. So Athens, ever the hero, joined with their shiny new navy. But still, they were woefully underpowered, 300 Greek triremes against the 12,000 strong Persian navy. This is looking familiar. But the one thing that gave the coalition hope was the design of the ships. This was the latest in naval technology. The trireme, called that because it was 3 rows of oars, making it able to travel anywhere, whether the wind blows in this direction or not. This was truly revolutionary in naval warfare, and it was with this fleet they managed to evacuate tens of thousands of Athenians before the Persian army could arrive. Now, I'm no expert in naval strategy, but when 300 ships can pull a stalemate out of a battle with 1,200, you have definitely done something right. And as the Greeks did that at the Battle of Artemisium, with roughly the same odds, it shows that they certainly were naval geniuses. But after the stalemate, the Greek navy retreated to the Bay of Salamis, but the Persians hunted them down and cornered them. This is where the Athenian strategists showed their true genius. The Persians had moved into position overnight, hoping to surprise the enemy, but this strategy was unlikely to work, since the short distance involved and the noises made by the rowers would attract the Greek fleet. Themistocles had indeed been expecting to be trapped in the straits, and he pulled back a few of the Corinthian ships to make it look like he was going on the retreat. The Persians took the bait and made to push the Greek line into the rocks, but these were Greek triremes and they were able to maneuver easily without sails, so the Corinthian ships rowed against the wind, out of the way, while the bulk of the fleet maintained the illusion of retreat. So as the Persians pushed the centre, the Corinthians smashed into their side flank, decimating them. With this, the Persian fleet was in disarray, and as the main force of the Greeks rushed forward, there was no chance of a Persian victory, and they retreated. This was one of the best victories of the entire war. With their renewed morale, the fleet won another battle, and an even greater battle, the Battle of Plateau. Funny thing about this battle though, it was a land battle. The Persians were trying to invade Plateau, and with an army of 110,000, they thought they were going to storm through the Greek defence of 38,000. But that was not quite the case. The Persians moved first. They poisoned the water supply the Greeks were using, rendering it useless, so the Greeks decided to retreat under the cover of night. Notice that the night retreats are a terrible idea and never seem to work. They keep messing up. But anyway, when dawn broke, the battlefield was a mess. Athenians on one side, Spartans on another, and the third contingent was outside the city walls of Plateau. Mardonius, the Persian leader, noticed an opportunity and took it. It seemed like it would be an easy victory for the Persians, and at first it was. The Athenians were only holding on by a thread, and so were the third contingent. The Spartans were the strongest link, and so Mardonius sent his biggest contingent after them. So Mardonius, suspecting that the end of the battle was near, got on his horse and charged into battle. You see him here in this picture. He's the guy on the horse, in the gold armor, you know, the really obvious gold armor that Spartan's about to stab. But that's not actually quite how it happened. It's a lot more interesting than that. So basically there's this guy, this Spartan soldier called Aramnestos, who's been fighting for hours. He has broken his spear, he has lost his sword, but he sees Mardonius on his horse, picks up a rock, and throws it at him with all his strength. It hits Mardonius in the head, splits his skull open, and he dies. And just like that, the tide of the battle is turned. The Spartans start winning, because Mardonius was an idiot. If he had just stayed back a little longer, Plateau would have lost, and the Persians would have conquered Greece. But no. And when the Persians saw their leader fall, they lost all hope, and they began to retreat. They fled the battle, leaving a victory for the Greeks, and thus the Persians were vanquished, cast out of Greece, never to return. This was the main deciding battle that ended the Greco-Persian War. At the end, thousands of Persians had been killed, and what was left of the Persian army withdrew north into Thessaly. Fighting between Greeks and Persians continued for many years, but the Persians would never invade Greece again. So why is it that we remember Thermopylae instead of these battles that the Greeks actually won? The ones that actually won the war for them? Well, like I said in the last video, and they held out. These Greeks, who were probably enemies a week ago, die side by side for something more than just their city. It was for the Hellenic culture. It was the idea of a unified Greek identity. Although soldiers not being from Sparta, Corinth, Phoenicia, or Athens, they were Greek soldiers fighting for Greece. The historian Herodotus later used it to show an example of a combined Hellenic union, and that despite their differences they were all Greek, they all worshipped the same gods, it didn't matter whether they were from a different city, they all had the same identity, the same culture. Despite Plataea and Salamis being actual victories, they did not show a unified Greek force, they were led by mostly their own city-states. Thermopylae was the only real battle that showed a true dedication and sacrifice towards the cause of Greece. Another reason Thermopylae was remembered is because of the story. A small force holding out against a much larger force for one reason, their goal and their ideology. This was used later on to inspire troops in World War II. In fact, Nazi Germany was quite fond of the tale, Hitler himself having a copy of the book that was written on it. But yeah, we don't talk about that. Also somewhat popular with the movie that was made on it, and then wait, this has a sequel? How does 300 have a sequel? What could that possibly be on? But that's not important. The real reason it should be remembered is because it basically was the beginning of the idea of a unified Greek culture, the beginning of the idea of Greece. Thanks for watching.